Hello and welcome to the Elite Prospects third 2025 NHL Draft Ranking. We're back. It's only been a month since our last ranking, but a lot has changed. The World Juniors, there's been prospect showcases. We've been watching a ton of tape. We're probably going to have some new players in the first, a ton of new names in the second, and lots of movement. But first, we got to talk about the top of the draft. The race for number one has not gotten any clearer. It's picking up quick, and so we have Cam Robinson to talk about who he thinks should go number one and what the industry is talking about.
Yeah, so this has been a nice slow burn, a long time coming, I'd say, probably going all the way back to the whole Linka when Matty Schaefer had the really excellent performance there, while James Hagens was probably just like eating hot dogs in summer and just hanging out, right? So yeah, it's the World Junior performances, I think didn't really clear things up for us all that much. I think a lot of people expected Hagens to really show out and put out a lot of numbers, and he did put up numbers. Most of his production came against some weaker teams, while Schaefer got, 3 1/4 periods under his belt, but really shone brightly in those fewer minutes that he had. And it's almost like when he was gone, he couldn't do any damage to his stock, but it elevated him because we didn't know what he could have done, and kind of that unknown really intrigued. And so I did the little chat where I reached out to, five GMs or executives and five scouts and just polled them on who they thought would go number one, who they would pick at number one if they were picking today. 7 votes for Matty Schaefer. And I thought it would have been a little closer than that. I thought there would have been maybe a 50-50 split or a 6-4. There was one who kind of sat it out and kind of hedged his bet for 3 players, including Michael Misa. But I think that that's a nice little microcosm of what the industry on the team side is kind of viewing it. And I think, some of the points that they made were some of the points that we've made in the past as well, too, right? Is that, center and D, they are the 2 primary positions that teams are looking for at the top of the draft and throughout the draft. But when you're looking at Matty Schaefer, you have an easier time projecting him to be a true number one defenseman than you do James Hagens being a true number one, simply because of his size, and he lacks those electric feet. So a player like Michael Misa, who is bigger, stronger, faster, maybe leaves a little bit to be desired on the brain side compared to Hagens. Not that he's dumb. Maybe he's even the guy that teams would jump on quicker down the middle position. I think it's still up for grabs, and I do think it's going to be team dependent on who is actually picking at that spot. But at this point, and it was for me last time, even though I wasn't here to shout about it. I did write up the big note on why I thought Schaefer should have been one on our board last month too. But I will shout it here again too. The skating, I think, is super high end for Schaefer. I think his activation game, his ability to work well with like high level talent, and those players recognize what a skill set he has. Not to mention, as a recently turned 17-year-old, just how important and he was for that Team Canada at the World Juniors, and then his missing out, the gap and the hole that it left. You don't see that too often from a 17-year-old defenseman, even with the player selection that the team, the guys they left behind to playing a role in that. So I think he has everything going for him. I think that there are still some parts of his game that can be fleshed out and be refined. Some of the decision making, some of the times when he jumps into the play, he can get a little too handsy with the puck and hold on to it for too long and run himself into a bit of trouble. But I think with his age and the runway that he has there, like I mentioned, I think it's easier to project him to be that true impactful number one defenseman who can run a power play in all situations for you and really impact the game at a high level. Is easier than to say James Hagens could do the same in the middle at the top of the lineup.
And if you want to read more about all these players and our daily thoughts on them, really, you can go to eliteprospects.com and go to any of these player pages. And now, if you have a premium subscription, you can read all of our game reports on them. And we add new game reports every single day. Basically, this weekend, we published 350 game reports. It has been a lot of editing on my part, but so if you want to check that out, get an EP premium subscription, go to player pages, find the scouting report section and check it out. All right, so now it is time to get some players on the board, and the room is overwhelmingly in favor of Matthew Schaefer at number one. David?
Yeah, I think those players were very close at last time. We weren't sure who we're going to put at first, but we were just waiting to see James Higgins at the World Juniors, and I think Cam said it. He had a good performance, a great one, even in some games. He showed very well, showed all of his skills, but Matthew Schaefer in that one game and in the games leading to the tournament and in some games earlier than that even, I think he has the highest upside of the class. And the floor is pretty high too, so you've got someone who's a safe NHL projection with all of his tools and that much upside. So that's very exciting, and he just edges James Higgins for me. It's still a close race. It could change. He's injured right now. We'll see how the next months go, but he's a very exciting prospect. So I would have Matthew Schaefer at one, and I would keep James Higgins at two, because I think in terms of thinking about upside, he's still the number two guy, because in terms of ability to make plays, playmaking, the pure skill element, he just edges Michael Misa a bit. I think Michael Misa is more of this kind of all-around force on the ice who breaks defenses open with his space, who takes advantage of mistakes, forechecks well. But I think James Higgins, with a bit more strength, is going to be able to impact the game the same way, and he's going to have that extra playmaking. So I would keep him at two.
Okay, now we're going to toss it to Daniel to talk about, is James Hagens number two? Is there another contender? And how does he think the rest of the top five should go?
I think Hagen should be two. Um, I echo everything that's been said about him so far. The performance wasn't like it was good, but it wasn't like overwhelmingly first overall, I guess, for lack of a better words. Right now, I have it as Schaefer, Hagens, Misa, Martone, McQueen. Obviously, there's a bit of there's a bit of ambiguity because McQueen has been out for a very long time. But when you look at his profile as a 6'5" center who has handling skill, who can stretch out his stride and create advantages, it's really hard to knock him down even further. Um, I love Michael Misa too. Same thing as David, creates so much in space. Really dynamic play with Epperson. So that's kind of how I have my top five. Schaefer's one just because of like age and runway. Like he's a September 5th birthday. Like that's like 10 days away from being in the next year's draft. Like, and he's already this good. Like it's kind of absurd.
Okay, so I think that locks in our number one and our number two, Matthew Schaefer, James Hagens. And so we have a little bit of a debate at three, but I think to introduce these players, we'll bring in our OHL scout Lauren to talk about Michael Misa, Porter Martone, and then we'll go back to Cam to hear why McQueen should be over Martone.
Okay, so I have been, I think, Misa over Martone since probably the start of the season. I just think the dynamic skill that he's shown all season long, the consistency, he's leading the league in both goals and points this season. He's currently the league leader in points per game as well. Martone slipped a little bit this weekend. He wasn't his most dynamic self, to put it in that way. Obviously, with the role that he played at the World Juniors, in and out of the lineup, I wasn't really expecting too much from him in that sense, because it's so hard to adapt to being in and out of the lineup, playing very limited minutes in a bottom six role. This is all stuff that he's not used to playing when he's in the OHL. And then when he returned, I think he had a 4-point game. Seemed like the confidence was super high again. He's back to playing with regular line mates under a coach who trusts him. That kind of eased a little bit of the concerns, like, okay, it was just, a bad tournament doesn't necessarily affect his stock overall. It's just between the two, I feel like Misa has had a more consistent overall season. He plays center. He drives play consistently. Also is just as dynamic, I feel, in a top line role for Saginaw. So not much has changed on my viewings of either player this season, and Martone's performance at the World Juniors has not affected his stock at all, I don't think. And this is just, I feel like not much has changed with these players for me.
I agree with Lauren that I don't think Martone's World Junior showing affected his stock one way or the other. And the only it was unlikely to, just for the situation he was going to be placed in. We recognize that, even if he wasn't healthy scratched for a couple of games. But I have this nagging issue when I watch Martone on a regular basis, is that he just goes dark for such long stretches and then just flashes brilliance and gets himself 2 or 3 points. But, the effort in the defensive zone or on the back check, even like if it's kind of like a race for who's going to be F1, F2, I often see him, he's like, I'll take F2. I'll take you run him around to me and I'll try to be the guy that pinches him off down low. He's tagged and heralded as kind of this power winger, but the power is so infrequently used. Now, so I put McQueen ahead of him for this one, and it's razor thin, but the center position, number one, I think McQueen is a more physical player, even if he's not like actively engaging physically all the time. I think that on a whole, I would call him a more physical player, and I would definitely say he's better defensively. I think he is engaged on switches. I think he has a really active long reach, and that stick is effective. I think he does lean into the body more often. I think he's just a little more tenacious in that regard. And then the size, playing down the middle. And it's tough because I'm going back to games that I'm watching from early in the season or from last season, where it just seems like he's more engaged throughout the whole entire game versus Martone is just kind of waiting for something to happen for him, for an opportunity to present himself that he can have a little bit of space and he can do the things that he does so well. I guess at the end of the day, I just looked at it as if I was picking and it was pick number 4 and I had the two sitting in front of me, I could probably make a better case for taking McQueen over Martone.
Okay, now this is where it gets fun because David is the ultimate Porter Martone fan here. So take us away.
I'm the ultimate fan, but I still have some doubts. It's just that I think that in moments, the hockey sense is so high. Like he has that feel for the game, knows where to be. So he doesn't have to work as hard as some others to get his points. And that's both a negative and a positive. The way we could get burned by dropping him too much is that effort and pace and physicality. Those are the things that tend to improve the most in players compared to like hockey sense and stick handling ability, things like this, pure skill. I think it's easier to take a player that's that smart and teach him how to play more of an NHL game and be a more impactful forward in for 60 minutes or the ice time that he gets. So we've seen in the past that we've dropped some forwards who are really smart because of their effort, and they tend to, when they're top prospect, they tend to figure it out to an extent. So we'll see how much he can figure it out, because it's always easier to project someone when you see that quality already in this game and it's not in Martone's game. But the hockey sense, it's really special sometimes. He's more of a playmaker this year. He was more of a scorer last year, I think. But he can do pretty much everything with the puck when he has options and he can leverage and he has the openings in which he can sneak in. So he's a kind of special prospect who could really, really score at the NHL level. I just don't know about his possession stats and defensive metrics, how they're going to look. So there are more question marks with him, but there's a lot of special in his game, I think.
I guess I have to share my opinion at some point. So, uh, for me, this is it's very close. I mean, you can make an argument that all of these players could be first overall contenders to some degree. For me right now, it's Porter Martone over Roger McQueen. There's a lot of uncertainty around Roger McQueen with the injury. And then on top of that, I think we have a larger sample of high-end play, albeit as inconsistent as it can be, from Martone than we do with McQueen. But I mean, that could change real fast in the second half as McQueen's getting ready to come back. He's going to have potentially a new line mate who we might talk about later in this strat in this ranking. So yeah, and the votes are more in favor of Martone from McQueen, but that is not a slight to McQueen whatsoever. This is a very, very, very tight group that I assume is going to result in a much bigger debate in March. So with that, it's our top five. So let's pick things up a little bit. I think everyone here has basically the same 2 to 3 players in the number 6 spot. So let's start with Daniel G on Jackson Smith.
Smith's a monster. He's one of the better rush defenders in the draft. Surfs across and just kills entries like nothing. He's flashing so much high end skill now. He's trying things like activating, carrying pucks end to end. He's just uber involved. He's huge at 6'3". He's pretty much everything that you want from a new age defenseman. Uh, he's gonna stop. He's gonna stop plays. He's gonna create for you. Yeah, he's one of my favorites in the draft just because he's such a high activity rate and he's just going to do so much for you.
And then Victor Eklund. Let's introduce Jimmy to this conversation.
Well, Eklund definitely should be in this range. I think he has just come from the World Juniors, where he, with his 161 pounds, dominated along the boards all tournament. He creates a lot of stuff. He's very creative. He has those spin moves, never gives up on pucks, great forechecker, defensive play, good playmaker. He hasn't really. I think he produced, I don't know, like 6 points or something in the World Juniors, but in club play, he hasn't really produced much. He creates a ton, but the end product hasn't been super effective of late. It started well in the season, so maybe that could be some sort of question mark. But I think he's a fantastically creative and fun player to watch, and does so many things, and just keeps the cycle going for his teams every time he's on the ice. And I think when he grows, he will be a very impressive player. I think he has top line potential.
Is he better than his brother?
I think they are different, but I think if he can be as skilled as his brother, I think he's better than his brother, because his brother is more of a thinker on the ice, while Victor is more, instincts, just go with energy and do everything. And William is more like he plans play more, but they're quite similar in style. They technically looks similar. So, and I also think that William was really good early. While Victor has been, his stock is been like this, So I think he has a chance to be better than his brother.
I can add just one thing. The one thing I noticed about Victor at the World Juniors, his release is faster than it was a year ago, and it hits the net like a rocket. He may not score all the time, like you said, but it's impressive.
Yeah, I also think what's really impressive with Eklund lately, I just want to mirror what you said. I think the playmaking approach is pretty similar between him and William. But he is a very reflexive player. He approaches, he doesn't really head into things with a set plan, but he's so good at improvising, reacting, understanding what's going on around him, just having split decisions that just work so well for him that yeah, I'm a very, very big fan of his game and have been all year. And the World Juniors were a reassuring thing, because it's one thing to do it at the Allsvenskan. It's another thing to do it where the pace is higher against stuff against teams where you have high end pressure. And yeah, he was very, very, very good for Sweden at that tournament.
The hard skill is insane.
It's absurd. Yeah.
He just he takes such a beating, and he always got out of the pile with the puck and then did something with it. And then I totally agree with Jimmy's instinct eval. There was one play where he was on a breakout and he just spun off the guy. He spun off the pressure on in the D zone circle and just connected with another Swede for the breakout. It was holy, just to do that in that moment is kind of wild.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really have much to add at this point. I'm still waiting for the playmaking skill to really take off in the Hockey Allsvenskan, because I was really impressed with his playmaking game last year in the juniors and then internationally, but he's more of a net front guy in the Hockey Allsvenskan, at least in my views so far. He goes to the net and gets a lot of scrappy chances, even if he's not scoring on all of them. But the playmaking skill, I'm pretty confident that it will arrive eventually. Just so much to like about the pace and the motor, and the size doesn't really matter when you have that level of compete and the physical skills, the hard skills along the boards. So many great details about him.
And our third player in this tier is a very similar one to Victor Eklund in Carter Bear, who you could take everything or just about everything that we've said about Victor Eklund and apply it to Carter Behr. Carter Behr is a very physical, very intense player, always in the middle of every battle, draws a lot of penalties. He's in everyone's face all the time. He creates a ton of skirmishes. And there's no one better in the draft right now at navigating all of that chaos to create scoring chances, to get a loose puck and backhand it in, to hit a turnaround pass in the slot for a look. And we're starting to see more and more dynamic skill from him. So, how do we want to tackle this? By our current setup, it is Smith, Eklund, Behr. That's the average rank that everyone has input so far. Are we okay with Smith at 6? Is there any strong dissent to that?
No.
As the key Eklund truther, I still think that Jackson Smith has shown more this year, and just so like Daniel said, just so many ways that he can impact the game. And yeah, even I agree, Smith is ahead, so I think we're good.
Okay, then it comes to projectability, right? Yeah, projectability. 6'3" defenseman. He's going to have an easier time bringing his game to the NHL than Victor Eklund is, and I think that's probably the two that we're looking at here rather than Behr. But
it rarely comes down to positional value when we make our list, but when it's that close, we kind of have to give a bit of an edge to defenseman and center and then profile, and so that's mainly why he's winning on this board. But it could flip easily the next time over.
Yeah, prove that you can versus prove that you can't, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Eklund versus Behr then.
The growing dynamic flashes from Behr is pretty big in my opinion. The steps he's taken, the trajectory, it's something to think about, in terms of projecting him out. If this keeps going, he's going to be he's going to be uber dynamic plus all that physical skill, right?
And I don't think the skating. Oh, sorry, I thought you were finished.
Go ahead.
I don't think the skating is going to matter that much, honestly, because he powers through his form. It's not the most efficient, but it doesn't matter because his motor is that good. So I don't think the skating is going to be a question at the next level. We'll see.
And there's always the chance that we see him move to center at some point. We got to see him a little bit at center with Julius Miettinen out. I think he's still out, actually. So he's been playing a tiny little bit of center. And as expected, he looks just like Carter Behr, but at center. So there's a chance that we see that. But both of these guys, honestly, are both, just different versions of Seth Jarvis, right? You can put them in your top 6. They're going to win puck battles, create a ton of space, set up chances, get chances, and annoy people. Intentionally or unintentionally. They're going to piss off a lot of people. So with Eklund, you might have the counter argument for David saying, that Behr's a little bit bigger, a little bit more physically developed, is that Eklund might have a little bit more physical runway. So we'll see. It's a very tight one. I feel like this is going to be a debate we'll be revisiting a lot, but as David mentioned, probably more votes in favor of Eklund over Behr. So let's go Eklund, then Behr. So the WHL run is probably going to continue unless someone wants, I don't know, Jake O'Brien in the top 10. But I think most likely the way that we're going to go is Lynden Lakovic, Cameron Schmidt, Braden Coots, Cameron Reid maybe, kind of all in this conversation. Jake O'Brien could be, Desnoyers could be, but overwhelmingly right now we have the WHLers ahead. So let's start there with Daniel.
I really like Cameron Schmidt here. He's small, but he's like a dynamo. He's so skilled. He has a second and third gear. He can do everything at speed. He has 30 goals already in the WHL. The tools are just immense. They're crazy. I know that they're with stake. If you're an NHL scout and you have stakes and you're looking at a top 10 pick and you see a 5'7" guy, there's some worry, but when you look at the physical skill he has, the hard skill, how he creates, how many advantages that he can string together in a single sequence, it's kind of absurd. If he was 6 foot, he's probably in contention for a top 3 pick. There's just a little bit of risk there because of the size, but yeah, he's incredible.
I'd say there's a lot of risk though, not just a little bit. There's a lot of risk with the size.
I disagree. I think he's really that special. Like, I don't know if I don't understand why people are not more excited about Schmidt. Like, I understand the overshooting concern, the size concern, but I think he's really special. Like, I keep repeating this. I think he's better than draft year Caulfield, better than draft year Stankoven, better than draft plus one Stankoven. Like, he, the way he creates on the ice, I think the hockey sense is high end, borderline elite in some games. And he has the stick handling skill on top. He's very fast. He can score from distance. He can make plays through opponents. He can orchestrate the whole ice in some games. So I think he's special. And there's not as much risk as we maybe think when we see a 5'7" player because of that special elements. And it's always the special players who make it. Like, he's a player you can rank top 10, and if you have a second first round pick, maybe not take him immediately and wait, or an early second if you have intel that he's going to fall. Like, I understand the profile questions, but I'd push a lot for him to stay in our top 10 just because he's really, really exciting.
Yeah, I started like casually watching Schmidt kind of whenever I could, and I was really impressed with the amount of sequences offensively that he has that you could actually see happen in the NHL, like as constructed. The way that he picks up pucks in motion, the way that he frequently like uses give and goes to access open space, really quick processing and reads. On top of having the elite shot, the playmaking. There's just like I agree with both you and Daniel. Like, I don't see as much of a concern regarding his projectability. Like, I understand he's small, but the way that he circumvents that is pretty projectable. And the league is kind of leaning towards these fast, both in terms of speed and pace type of players. So like, I'm not worried at all about Schmidt. I'd be okay with him here at 9.
I just want to add one thing. I was going to say to Cam, and then you can go. What Cam said about his size is out there. Like, people in the industry are talking about like, hey, he's a great player, but we don't know about his size. Like, I've heard that at the World Juniors more than 3 or 4 times from different people.
Yeah, and like I don't even really care like that it's out there with the NHL teams. Like and I'll just have to play devil's advocate because it's like I'm on the island a little bit on this side for Cameron Schmidt. Is that, I've seen him live a handful of times, lots on tape. I don't think that his IQ is like super high just because of the amount of volume shooting from bad angles that he just like consistently does while missing passing opportunities or missing driving opportunities or curl back opportunities. That it infuriates me when I see it so often because he has so many tools, such great, like he has great speed. He does have a great release, obviously, like he knows how to score goals. He's not overly physical in the sense like Logan Stankoven was with like kind of built like that fire hydrant, and he was able to really like get underneath players and inflict where he wanted them to go and where he wanted to get to at the puck. Stankoven had that defensive play. He had that those leadership qualities, which is why I was so high on him in his draft year, while fully expecting him to fall to round 2. I don't think Schmidt has those leadership, the defensive, that physical ability. He doesn't have. There are some of those concerns about, how his effort level is on and off the ice. But he scores goals. He knows how to produce. He's speedy. He's a first-round caliber prospect. But I think that he's better served in the back half of the first round rather than a top 10 pick in this. But at the same time, I do recognize that this class is light on that electric skill set that he can bring, especially in club play. I think he's better for the Giants than he is anywhere else that I've seen him, right? Didn't like his game at the Hlinka. Didn't think he played very well at that CHL Top Prospects game in a 2-game exhibition, whatever. But it was just another couple of games that I got to see him live that he didn't really stand out for me. And I think it just showed more of some of the deficiencies in his processing skills offensively. I just have a hard time seeing, like, I think that there is a path for him to become a first line wing and a first power play guy. And if that's the case, you've got yourself a home run. But you're getting yourself a home run on day 2, I think. I think that's where he's going to go, if not maybe at the very tail end of the first round. But I think it's really unlikely a team's going to step up anywhere near this spot, which doesn't really matter for our board and our purposes long term. I just think that it's a real gamble to say that this is going to be the player that's going to score 35, 40 goals and put up 80 or a point a game or whatever. That it's possible, but it definitely, I don't think it's super likely. I don't think that's the overwhelming option at the end of this.
For me, like, the physicality is a strength, not to say that it will be in the NHL, but I think like he's very physical. He hits constantly. He's looking for contact on the forecheck all the time. Reverse hits, leverages guys, very good at controlling contact going into the wall. For me, his physicality is one of the biggest elements of his game. And do we project a 5'7" guy to be, power forward, physical in the NHL? Of course not, but it shows that he has the skills and the robustness to overcome it. Like this is when he steps into the NHL, he's going to be a lot more robust, a lot more sturdy in puck battles, a lot better at controlling contact and physical exchanges than, say, Cole Caulfield was, in my opinion. And then, as you mentioned too, like there is a big difference between what he shows club play and in these tournaments and in short situations, right? Like I don't think he overshoots very much. Like it's also hard to say that a dude who averages under 4 shots per game at 5-on-5 in club play is shooting the puck too much, in my opinion. And that's not on goal. That's like attempts towards net. But when you're looking at, say, like the Link or whatever, or the CHL top prospects game, it does make you think like, okay, what is the adjustment period going to be like? What can he do to adapt his game in an unfamiliar situation, right? And then as you go up these ranks, as you go up these levels, you're going to be faced with more and more and more of those. You're going to be in the you're going to be in the NHL one night, and then the AHL the next. And so it's going to be tricky in that sense, I think. So there's going to have to be some real progress in that part of his game. But he is very much a guy who relies on taking advantage of gaps, understanding space and reads and so on. So there might be some difficulty in that sense, I think, more so than the physical element for me. But yeah, I mean, it's one that comes with a ton of risk. But on the flip side, like when you look at the rest of the guys in this range, there's also a lot of risk too. Like Lakovic comes with a lot of risk, I think. I think Cameron Reid comes with a lot of risk, who I know is a defenseman that we're all very high on because he can show a lot of different things, but he doesn't show them every single night. And so for me, when I look at this, it's like, the pure upside of Schmidt is really high, and the questions aren't that much more significant in terms of can he reach that ultimate upside, not in terms of will he play in the NHL, of course, that's a completely different question. But in terms of can he reach that ultimate upside, I don't think the questions are much different than they are for the rest of the guys in this range. So if we do hedge on him, it's only going to be a few spots, I think.
Yeah, the main question I could entertain, I think, that's is Lakovic a better version of Schmidt at much bigger size, because they play a kind of similar game. He's not the most physical, although I think Schmidt might be more physical in some games than
he is
Lakovic.
more physical than Lakovic by a long shot.
Yeah, but if you project to the NHL, like is he going to be able to add that dimension and become a really complete player with all that skill? So he's very, very fun prospect too. It's a question for the room. What do we think of Lakovic?
Yeah, I am Lakovic over Schmidt.
When you look at it, he's like 6'4". He draws pressure. He'll cut back and escape, and then like layer a pass through like 3 guys, and then he'll get the pass back and he'll hammer a one-timer that's like ridiculously hard. Like the tools are pretty immense there, and I think there's room to grow physically, like in terms of how he uses his frame and the advantages he creates with his frame.
Shout out to Guy Flaming of the Pipeline Show, who interviewed Lynden, and it was a great interview. And so the injury was that he threw a reverse hit, which is something that Lynden said he doesn't normally do, and then got a small fracture in his collarbone. So he should be back ahead of schedule. He should be back earlier than anticipated. But yeah, shout out to Guy for getting that. And yeah, I did think it was a little interesting that he did it on a reverse hit. We're all begging him to be more physical, and then he gets injured trying to be physical. So sorry about that one, man.
I also think it's a pretty easy thing for him to learn. Like it'll take some adjustment, it'll take some adaptation in terms of the way that he approaches the game, but like he has a frame to be able to leverage that pretty consistently if he learns it. Those physical contact, like proactive contact, engaging physically along the boards, getting inside positioning. These are NHL details, but like David said, it's easier to take someone who has the tools, who has the sense that he has, and kind of upscale that to make him a more effective player. It's kind of the same conversation we're having about Martone regarding pace and physicality. I feel like it's a pretty similar situation in Lakovic's case as well.
I think a lot of teams would love to add a 6'4" dual threat scorer.
Yeah.
It's as simple as that, right?
Who can play defense too.
Yeah.
Yeah, like this is a well-rounded guy who has lots of experience in this league, and he keeps finding new ways to get better, keep finding new ways to contribute. So I think he's going to be a very hot commodity, even if he doesn't have a ton of hype yet. Let's kind of just roll through the rest of this. We have Reid, Coots as our next two guys. Any objections to that?
I still want to see Reid at 11. I think he has the most. It's weird to say that of a 6 foot defenseman who's a bit inconsistent and shows different
How
things.
dare you? He is 5'11 3/4.
I was about to say that's generously listed 6. Yeah.
So he's
Yeah.
6 on skates.
There you
Yeah,
go.
that works. That works.
Yeah.
I think he just does everything well. Like I really like this player. You really have to watch a ton of games of him to appreciate what he does, because depending on the position, it's going to adapt how he plays. And some games he's always on the rush and dangling opponents and dancing on the line. But other games he's just purely a shutdown guy. So he absorbs the rush and makes some and uses his stick to cut lanes, and he's very aware defensively. So he has a bit of everything. Doesn't always show it in the same game. And the tools are really interesting, even if he doesn't have NHL size. Like he has the skating, he has those physical skills still. He's maybe a bit of risk due to his size, but the rest is pretty much there, I think.
Go ahead, Hattie.
Yeah, I'm waiting for
All
this.
All right. I will wait for the tomatoes to come raining over my head. Caleb Desnoyers. I think his playmaking, he's gone from just this pure like connector and just trying to understand how his teammates work to really kind of like controlling play. Like he's become the playmaker, the guy who opens up plays east-west, who creates chances. I think that's been a big progression in this game lately. I certainly think like the conversation between Desnoyers and Carbonneau is like there's a gap that's grown there. I've only gotten more comfortable with that assessment as the last month has gone on. On top of just being a high-end competitive player, like he's consistently like the mindset of Desnoyers is just so solid, and I think that makes a big difference. And like we need to take that into consideration. Like this is a guy who consistently proves to coaches that he deserves to be trusted, consistently gets high-end assignments, up lineups. I don't think that's going to change in the NHL. Like I understand the concerns with the skating. I think he's an average grade skater at best. I also think that he doesn't really use his pace in many projectable ways, but he's starting to flash it. He's starting to accelerate, decelerate, cut inside on zone entries, and kind of leverage his pace in more projectable ways. And I still think that despite the fact that his skating isn't high end, he's one of the best forecheckers in the draft. Like he's very, very effective physically, sets the tone early, wins a lot of battles, anticipates play incredibly well. Like there's just so much to work with at Desnoyers. I think that like he deserves to be in the same conversation at least as Coots and O'Brien.
I'm gonna back you up on that too, Hattie. I am also on Team Caleb, as we know.
Good.
No, I think so too. I think that his like superpower is like just like leveraging opportunities, right? He can also create them for himself, and he is a primary playmaker, but like he takes advantage of situations. He takes what's given to him and he like maximizes it. And he's a winner. He's the best player on the best team. He puts up points. He can play defensively. Like you said, there's a lot of things. He's not super dynamic with his handles or with his skating or anything, but I just think that he's going to be one of these players that does play in a top 6 and does contribute really, really well and like elevates those around him.
Yeah.
For a center in this position, I think the risk is super low on him compared to some of the other players in this zone, that I think that like the baseline for him is like, what is he going to be a 3C? Like that's okay too, if that's how it ends up at this spot in this draft. But I do think that there's like very legitimate top 6 upside for him. And he's just like a really great kid too.
Yeah.
Hey?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I like him.
I think the other side of that is you have to look at what he's doing this year. Like it's ridiculous. Like you said, he's like the best player on the best team, and it's not even close. And he's the youngest player on that team. Like it's not just the best team in the queue. I think it's the top 5 team in the CHL. He's leading them by 20 points. He's a main offensive fulcrum on that team. When they need a goal, when they need to protect a lead, he's on the ice. Like you got to take that into consideration. I think he's doing wonderful things this year and doing it with line mates that he hasn't really played with before. Like Karchik and Vidicek are kind of new additions to this team. He took some time to get used to them, and now he's fully integrated with those guys and with others on his team. And he's still just continuing to find different gears, different elements, different ways to impact the game. I really like what I've seen from Desnoyers so far.
Also, just to add, I'm on Team Caleb too, but I think he also gets good advice from his brother Elliot. I mean, I see a lot of Elliott, probably more than I want to. And Caleb does all those things that Elliott probably should have been able to do. But he has a guy that's on the inside, so to speak, that, has played a little bit in the NHL, is playing in the AHL, and kind of knows what it takes. That matters.
I personally have been very swayed by this argument, actually, because I think now it gets a lot harder after the framing of that argument to have Braden Coots over him, for example, when we've seen them on the same team and Coots has been given the lower sign up. When certainly Coots is faster and plays a more dynamic game, but he's also in a much tougher environment in Seattle. And you can look at that in two ways. Maybe that's more opportunity for him to grow, or maybe it could be a limiting factor over the next couple of years for him to achieve. And as we know, Moncton plays very dynamic. They play a very fast-paced game. So I think for me, it makes sense to have Desnoyers at number 12, Coots at number 13.
I don't think he's dynamic. I agree with almost everything that was said, though. He's an amazing connector. He's skilled. He's huge. There's power elements, but I just rather take a more dynamic player like Jake O'Brien, Carbonneau, even Coots just shown more dynamicism in my viewings. Obviously, I don't have as many as Hattie, so I'll defer there. But I just don't see. I see him more as more of 15 to 19 range, not right here. But yeah, that's just where I'm at.
You have to take into account not just the league they play in, but the division they play in. I think we have to be careful with the Maritime division.
Yeah, they're not good.
Yeah, I see the same thing Dan does, the lack of pace, the lack of dynamic skills. I think he's a take what is there player. So he's not that pure creator, but he relies on his teammates being open. He forces a lot of passes too. And the pace of play is very low. He doesn't move his feet that much when making plays. And he's in a league that promotes that because everyone is always open. There's a lot of space. He has some Jordan Dumais elements, I think. He's a much bigger player. The tools are much better, but we just have to be careful with that profile because I think the game is much easier for him. There's the argument that it's going to allow him to develop his skills, and we've seen players like him before develop their pace and their motor and their physicality. He has some Shane Wright elements too, because Shane Wright was the same kind of connector who was not a pure creator in his draft year, and then he went to the AHL and developed that sort of game too, and he became more of that kind of power forward, and that's accessible for Caleb. Is he the same caliber of prospect as Shane? I don't know. There's a lot of considerations there. I think we can have him at 12, and all of that range is very, very close together. And it's our arguments of runway and upside and the pace of play and all of this. And all of those things can change over the next few years. I think it's going to end up whoever gets in the best environment in the NHL is going to become the best player, unfortunately. But we just have to separate these players anyway right now.
Yeah, a quick word before we pick up the pace. I don't think it's the same caliber as Wright, but I think they're made of the same fabric. Very, very adaptable, very versatile, and students of the game. Really, everything I've heard about Caleb Desnoyers, character-wise, motivation-wise, is a guy who wants to get better and will do everything to get better. So,
and that matters.
Yeah, it really does.
So I'll be sure that after the draft, as it's happening, I'll make sure to change the order that it appears on the draft guide so it reflects that. Okay. So I think Jake O'Brien at 14 then.
Yeah,
so
we have to push him up.
I think we kind of have to do it. It's the same argument, but he's the biggest, the least physically developed, the one who has shown the most change in his game throughout this season. So Lauren, why don't you tell us about that?
Yeah, and I think we all really saw it on display at the OHL Top Prospects game this week. I mean, far and away the most dynamic player on the ice. The playmaking vision is just so high end. You can find players from just about anywhere on the ice, whether it's in motion or at a standstill, down low, good in space. But he doesn't need to have a ton of space to feather passes through really tight seams. Just really impressive playmaking ability. I'd like to see a little bit more shift-to-shift consistency in the back half of the season. I'm sure it'll get there as he continues to build strength. And, as now that he's gotten Eric Van Acker back from injury, I expect the two of them to kind of just take off in the back half. So This one seems like a no-brainer to me. He's the guy I think who's, as far as like the top guys go, he's the one who really solidified his like draft stock rising with that performance this week.
Love a 6'2" right-handed center with like he's probably going to stack on 25 pounds of muscle, right? You can like easily see that happening, and that's just going to only like infiltrate his game and make it so much more powerful and effective at the next level.
He's going to be so sturdy.
He's a real wild card. He could end up being like, one of the top centers in this class, no problem.
Yeah, he could move up. I think he has maybe top 10 upside in this class. We'll see how he evolves, but he's on the rise for sure.
Put him at 12.
I also have him at 12. And now it's Carbonneau versus Martin, I think, here. And then the
Brady
defenseman.
Martin.
Yeah.
I could talk about Carbonneau for a bit. I've come around on his game a decent amount. Like, I was really not a fan at the start of the year. But you got to value the ability to just get 87,000 puck touches a game and just run around and run the game and do whatever he wants. It's very interesting, especially with the caliber of line mates he's been playing with. Like, Blainville has been kind of struggling this year on and off. Like, they have decent patches of play, and when they have decent patches of play, it's because of Justin Carbonneau and what he's able to do. He's basically been stapled on the second line, but he's playing every single offensive scenario, and he's playing PK minutes. And the dynamism is just absolutely ridiculous in this game. Like, the tools are off the charts. He's a 6+ grade skater, shooter, handler, passer. His processing is getting up there as well. Like, I still think the decision making and the willingness to just play his game, no matter who he's playing with, could hinder him at the next level. He's not very adaptable, but he's really intelligent. Like, I'm starting to see it now. There was one specific third period that he played in one game where I was like, if he continues to do this, if he manages to do this consistently, he'll be a top 5 pick. The composure, the ability to control the game, to dictate where the puck goes, to get it back in good areas, to not overshoot, not overpass. Like, the toggle was great on that side, but it was just that one period. And then he went back to Justin Carbonneau, which is take the puck, force it up the ice, force to play open. Which works really well in the queue, but I have a lot of questions around his processing, his maturity, like his kind of ability to develop a more versatile and effective game at the NHL level. I think what he's showing right now was great, and he's certainly a top 15 like guy. I think he should be the next guy on the board here. I like him more than Martin, maybe tied with Mrtka and Fiddler, but yeah, that's kind of my read on him.
I'd say I liked his ability to adapt in the 2-game set against the Americans, where he didn't try to just stick handle through the entire team, right? He played like a third liner game, because that's where he was slotted in. And so it was pucks in deep. He was hard along the wall. He did get to the net. He was making some playmaking decisions too that I approved of. Those were arguably some of my best viewings of him, just because it was so much more translatable to the next level.
He's a free advantage creation. Like, he just creates advantages nonstop.
Yeah.
He's in the mold of a Trevor Connolly, Tim Stutzla, those players. Yeah. We questioned their decision making, but then they were just very, very skilled against a weaker position, and they just tried everything all the time. We'll see how it translates. I think it's true that Desnoyers is going to have an easier time adapting his game to an extent because of his personality, maybe, and all this. But I think Carbonneau is going to be able to do it too, and he's very, very skilled and very, very fun. So we're going to keep watching these prospects.
Okay, so that's our 15. So now we have the very long road to 64 from here. We kind of have an idea of where we're all feeling, where all these players are going to go. So Brady Martin, what do we think of Brady Martin, Lauren?
I mean, my opinion on Martin hasn't really changed since our last sport. I mean, he's still the same super physical, high pace player who he sets the tone on the forecheck. He's physical. He can create goals, works, give and goes. There's playmaking ability. He's really good chemistry in the Sioux with Travis Hayes. They played together at the OHL Top Prospects game. I felt more in like a checking role as opposed to like a role where he was really driving offense. But again, he's so consistent and so good at the type of game he plays. Obviously, the mechanics are not super high end at the moment. They could get better with further development. But he's just really all around solid center. the only reason that he's maybe dropped a little bit from the last board is just because O'Brien has really shown that like next level playmaking, dynamic ability, and it's really not a knock on Martin's game at all.
Now we have a tricky question. Are we going to drop Anton Frondell even further? We had him at 17 last time, which I think was the lowest that we've had him so far. Public rankings still seem to have him as a consensus top 10 pick. So, Jimmy, should we drop him further? Is this his time? What do you think?
Well, I can't say anything about the other players we have in this range, so I can't really argue like that. But Frondell, I have been watching. I try to watch like every game he plays now, just to see if we have missed something. But he hasn't given me any proof that we should have him as high as many other boards have. I really like the player. He's big. He's listed at 6'1", but his frame looks like he could be. His reach is even bigger than a 6'1" player. He looks really big, even in playing senior players. He's can hit really hard and win pack battles like that, and he's very strong in board battles too. But the biggest issue I think with him is, he has. You can see his hands is good, his shot is really good, but he rarely plays from skating. He doesn't really show any elite manipulation skills that you want to see maybe from a player who is ranked in the top 10. So there's a lot of risk with taking him too high. He has, bust risk if you pick him too high and believe too much in him. So he can still become a very good player. He needs to become more intense, needs to skate more, create more, play faster. His skill is kind of low pace too, so he needs to just play with more pace, I think, to take steps. And so I don't know. I can't argue for him to get picked slotted higher than we had him last time.
Jimmy, can I ask you a question? When you see him come to North America, do you feel like his game is more suited for that than what you're watching?
I don't know. The pace is kind of high in the smaller rink, so I think he needs to play more from skating, even if he plays in North America. I mean, that shot is great. His small area skill is really good. So I think I don't think it's a rink size issue. I think he just needs to do what he does, but he needs to do it faster and more consistent and contribute more in all three zones and all of that. So I think he's a promising player that has I don't know what is call it in English, long-term project. I guess he needs to work on a lot of things, and maybe the injury has slowed his development in some way, but he's playing many minutes now, so I think he should be picking up development-wise.
I was going to bring up some of the injuries and how that may have slowed the development, and the fact that he's already physically mature. Like, he's developed. Like, he's not going to get much bigger than he is now. Like, this is the player that he's going to be. Stylistically, he could change, but it feels like all the other outlets that rank him like as high as like a top 5 or a top 2 pick still, it's like just super anchored on that World Junior A a couple years ago, some of the international showings where he flashes. And granted, like, he has that awesome one-timer on the power play. I just don't see him being a power play one guy. Right. So it's like, is he going to be doing that with 20 seconds on the second unit? He might have to reinvent himself as being like a sturdy north-south, pick up the pace, be a kind of a dual checker, chip in some offense down the lineup type of player too. It's I think that for us, if we have him in that 20 range, I think that's what he has earned at this point and what his projection probably looks like too.
Yeah, and just one more thing on Frondell. I watched those tournaments, like even last year, the Five Nations, the World Junior A. This year, the World Junior A, and I hear that he was incredible, but I see the same player. There was nothing different about him. Like he was just playing with different supporting cast. Maybe Victor Eklund contributed to his scoring. I went and rewatched those games. I think we came coming into the year before the injury, we just didn't see it. And even if he's scoring more, earning more minutes in the Allsvenskan and performing at the World Junior A, although he just had 4 points in 5 games, we continue to see the same player. Nothing has changed, and it's not the injuries at this point. It's just what he is, and he hasn't evolved in a year, and he's already physically mature. So it's not trending in the right direction, I think. But we have to respect the package of skill that we described before. Like he could become that second line center, maybe not put up a ton of points, but become that responsible two-way guy and be good on the forecheck and unleash that one-timer from time to time and make short passes. Like he can be that supportive force. It's just the upside and from like if you compare him to Jake O'Brien, who can put up maybe 25 pounds of muscle and he's already a better playmaker, there's a difference in upside between those two players.
What about him versus Malcolm Spence?
They're very similar, I think. One plays in the OHL. One doesn't play a lot of minutes right now, and they both haven't developed that much over the past year either. And they play that sort of physical game. Who they like to find space and unleash their shot. They play a short passing game. One is on the wing, one is at center, or projects to be a center. I would give more certainty to Malcolm Spence because of his environment. I think it's easier to project than Frondell with his history of injury and his declining play in some months before that. So I like Malcolm Spence better, but they're a very similar player in terms of style.
I think we all like Spence more. So let's put Spence and Frondell down. And then let's talk about some defensemen. We have Mrtka, we have Fiddler, we have Kashawn, Aitcheson. So let's talk about those guys and how we rank them.
They're not all that different, but they project differently to the NHL by different paths. Murtagh, I watched Murtagh a lot recently, and it's quite easy. It's quite easy to see what he's going to be at the NHL level. I don't think he's going to put up points. Like I thought coming to the year that he was going to be more of a playmaker at the line, and he's playing a lot of minutes and making some good passes from time to time. But it's more of the way he absorbs the rush. He uses his stick, and the skating is good enough at his size that I think he's going to pick up more and more defensive details and project as this number four, more insulator guy at the NHL level who can make some plays and contribute to the offense from time to time, jump in spots, but he's more of a safer projection. Fiddler has more upside in that we're not sure what he's going to be exactly. Like he could push his offensive game even more. He's a 6'4", very mobile kind of player who's not as refined, who's getting a lot of opportunities inside his team to play on the power play and get puck touches. I have more hockey sense concerns for Fiddler than Mrtka in that Mrtka plays close to his identity, close to his strengths. Like he understands what he is. Fiddler is just I see him as being more all over the ice and trying more and committing more mistakes. That's sometimes a positive because you can think that this player is going to develop faster, but it also raises some concerns about the way he sees the game. And Aitcheson, he's a bit like Mrtka. Like he knows what he is. He wants to be physical. He wants to hurt even and be violent. And he has that kind of really physical element. And occasionally you see him when there's more space. He can make those plays on the offense too. He can take the puck and dangle and make a pass across, things like this. But I don't think it is. His defensive potential is as great as Mrtka because of the difference in tools and size and reach. And I don't think he's going to be as potentially good offensively and as potentially exciting as Fiddler. So my ranking would be Mrtka, Fiddler, and Aitcheson.
Mrtka plays like 25, 30 minutes a night in Seattle. He plays power play 1, penalty kill 1. He eats a ton of minutes. He gets a ton of opportunity. He gets the puck a lot more than Fiddler. But he has also been better than Fiddler since coming to the WHL if you look past his first weekend. So I think that choice is pretty straightforward. I think it's probably Mrtka and then Fiddler if we want to rank those two in that order.
I just saw Mrtka live a couple times and like he's so big in person and his range is so ridiculous. Like he kind of defends by just like reaching out and then just like forcing guys outside and just being aggressive and poking pucks away. But it's totally true. He's on the ice all the time. Like it's within like he takes one shift off and then he's on. And Seattle runs everything through him. They don't have Minio anymore, so the opportunity is just going to be ridiculous moving forward. But I agree with everything that David said. Like between them.
I think unfortunately, David, you're right in your assessment of those three. Even though Aitcheson's the most fun, we probably like him the best. But yes, Mrtka is going to be the most projectable, then Fiddler, then Aitcheson.
I also think the details though with Fiddler, like Daniel was saying that he thinks that like he reaches a lot and can be inconsistent in that regard. For me, like I haven't seen much of that whatsoever. I see a guy who like he does have long arms and he does like reach out to poke, but like he still keeps backwards momentum when he does it. Like so maybe there's some inconsistency in the details. Like after all, this is a guy who came over to the WHL mid-season and he's playing 30 minutes on a bad team. So like, there's going to be some volatility in how he performs. But for me, I think like the details have been shockingly good, to be honest.
The reaching was Mrtka.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, you just said Fiddler, but yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, no, I'm talking about
Yeah,
Mrtka.
he's a good skater too. Like
It's
he
ugly,
stays in front.
but he's powerful.
Yeah, and he can stretch out his stride. Like he's winning retrievals. He's kind of basic on the blue line, but he does smart things. Like he hunts for rebound shots. He moves. He activates a lot. Like there's a lot to like there. Like I agree with he's like a solid number 4. Like I think that's an insulator comments. Like I think that's exactly what he's gonna be, and I think he's gonna be well sought after by NHL teams this draft. Like I could see him going even higher.
He'll just turn into Carson Soucy or something at the NHL level.
Yeah.
And he also has like what, one less point than Fiddler does, and he started playing here in December. So you know how it goes.
Yeah, he plays a lot of minutes.
And I think with Kashawn, right, the difference is one of upside, really. It's that both Fiddler and Mrtka could kind of be that guy inside your top 4, whereas with Aitcheson it's probably 4 or 5 kind of territory, right? I think that's a nice little, and then of course Ravensburg and the goalie. I think that's a nice little way to finish out our top 22. So the defenseman rounded out, then the goalie, and then this is where it kind of gets a little bit crazy because I think we all have players who we like. A lot of them are very different in this territory. So I'll start with one who we all like, Ben Kindel, who has been a big time improver in the last few months for us. So he has become he was more of a defensive playmaker type last season and early in this season. And then throughout, he's added more and more dynamic elements. He plays in a great line with the Calgary Hitmen, a team that's really going to make a big push for a championship this year. And in doing that, he still hasn't lost the defensive side, the forward checking skills. He's not necessarily a great dynamic NHL skater, but he plays fast. He uses his teammates really well. He can be very deceptive. So he might not have the prototypical tools or frame of a top 9 NHL scoring forward, but he has the style of play and the intelligence and the details to do it and overcome the physical limitations. So for me, he would be the guy I'd start this next tier of players with.
He operates so quickly. Like, I've even seen more dual threat games where his shot's been way more of a weapon. I think he should be next, honestly. And then get into like the USHLers and Epperson, guys like that.
I really like Bill Zonnon though. He has me sold now. Like the things he's doing over in Hawaii are ridiculous. Like I still think the skating and handling combination is limiting, but he circumvents that really well. I think he's one of the best passers in the draft as well. Like his playmaking skill is absolutely ridiculous. So versatile, so effective, and I think it's by necessity. Like I think he's such a good passer because he needs to get rid of the puck right away in transition when he gets his feet planted at the blue line because he can't accelerate from that position or, leverage advantages. But you'll be hard pressed to find a harder worker than Bill Zonnon. You'll be hard pressed to find a better passer than him at this stage. Like he's got that in his tool bag, and I think he's just going to continue to leverage the motor, the forechecking, the physicality that he has on top of the playmaking skill and the hockey sense that he has. He's playing center right now on the top line for Hawaii. I don't think he's ever played center before this season. Like this is very new for Zonnon. And he's been put in a position where he's basically like forced to adapt, and he's been doing it wonderfully. Like I really like this, but I have him as an A grade. Like I'm really sold on what he can bring to the NHL.
Just in terms of playmaking, I don't know if Kindel's or Zonnon is the best. I think Kindel sees the ice even a more advanced way than Zonnon. Zonnon has the physicality and the motor, and like he doesn't have the skating, but we've seen in the past that skating doesn't matter that much if you have that kind of motor and that kind of desire to power through your inefficient form to get to your spot. So I don't think it's going to matter as much, even if the grade is going to be a bit terrifying because it's going to be a pretty low grade for his skating. I bet he's going to figure it out. It's just Kindle, I think, is more offensive upside in terms of playmaking, and the defensive game is also great. He just does it in a different way than Zonnon, who's all about checking and pressure, and Kindle is more cerebral in the way he approaches the game. So I think they're comparable prospects, and this is one big group of players who comes down to preference again, like the other ones we had before. I like Kindle just a bit more than Zonnon. I think they could be right next to each other. And there are other players I like in this tower too.
I will say though regarding Zonnon, like he has tremendous transition metrics. So like the issue with Zonnon is more with like acceleration from a standstill and like agility, evasiveness in tight spaces. Anything that goes from low pace to high pace, he struggles to make that transition. But once he gets going, like he's incredibly fast. Like he's shockingly fast in transition. Like he's able to pick up speed and just beat guys wide, and like especially that's what makes him such a good forechecker is he's able to like pick up speed in transition, like take advantage of tip dumpins and just like get to the puck first, and then from there you're not getting the puck. Like so I think there's also some transition elements to his game when he keeps his feet moving. The problem is as soon as he stops moving his feet and then tries to pick up the pace, then I think that's a big problem. But like I think he's fast. Like he's able to create and transition due to that.
We should hear Seb on some of the USHLer.
Yeah, there's a whole glut of USHLers in and around this tier, so it really depends on what you're looking for and what you want to value most. William Moore is the 1A grade I assigned, but that was a coin toss, just like a lot of the B grades I gave that could have been A, like Benjamin Kevan, for instance. But William Moore, I really like some of the more recent viewings I've logged of his, where he's been integrating a lot more refined physical tools into his game, and it's just really waking him up and allowing him to settle in a bit with the NTDP. This is not a team with much chemistry, but he's really finding a way to work with his teammates. He's no longer trying to think ahead of play all the time, but he's finding little pockets of space to support and down low in the offensive zone. Watched a game against Boston University where in the breakout, William Moore manhandled Kamil Bednarik to retain possession, got a breakout out of that. He's starting to learn to use his legs to protect the puck as well. And a lot of my doubts earlier this season have been down to that physical immaturity with Will Moore, just really struggling to use his tools under pressure through contact. And there have been more flashes of that functioning. And he combined well as well with LJ Mooney in terms of pacey, creative offensive sequences. So he's a player I think could definitely fall into the next 5 picks with Will Moore. But again, Benjamin Kevan as well is right in here in terms of just pure dynamism. He's so pacey. Feel very similarly to how I felt a month ago with Kevan. I don't think much has changed in his projection or his style since then, but he's continuing to gain steam here in the USHL. And you also have Jack Murtagh, who has been my first ranked all year long. But there are some questions around there with the IQ, with the vision, with Murtagh, but the motor, the shot are really, really enticing skill sets here. But for the time being, I think I'd perhaps lean more towards Will Moore because the runway is really, really enticing with that player.
Yeah, I could add about Moore. I'm with you now, Sebastian. I have turned on that too. You know, the All-American game may just be a game, but this game actually had a lot of defense and a lot more hitting than it usually does, almost a fight, which never happens, right, in that. And Moore did get in front of the net and had a hell of a deflection. And when I spoke to him after the game, I do see where there's parts of his body that are physically immature, but I do see where he's starting to get stronger. And if this guy will go to the crease and do that, that's a big factor.
I think in terms of like USHL power forward type of players, Václav Nestrašil from Muskegon's probably leapfrogged Murtagh on my board at this point. Nestrašil has outshone Ivan Ryabkin in every game that Ryabkin's played so far in the USHL, all 4 against the U17 NTDP as well as Lincoln, where well, Lincoln dominated that weekend series just now against Muskegon, and Nestrašil was still consistently creating, really powerful player, big frame, and some really nice flashes of playmaking and vision as well in there. I think there's a lot to work with in terms of the upside, but he's far from a sure thing, so a lot of things that have to come together. But he was Muskegon's most used forward against Lincoln, was leading the forwards in power play time and shorthanded time as well, and playing first line minutes. And yeah, he's been really, really solid down the stretch here for the Lumberjacks.
This is Shane Vansaghi territory too. Absolute tank. He's a bit mechanically limited. Well, he's not a bit. He's very mechanically limited, but um, he's like one of the best space creators in the NCAA. He's showing some skill. He's translating like right away into NCAA hockey. His upside may not be super big, but he probably could be like a tanky like middle six, bottom six forward. Um, but yeah, I agree with the Will Moore stuff. My latest viewings have been the best games I've ever seen from him, and it's and I just agree with the physical runway stuff. Like he's like 6'2.5" or whatever, and um, he just has a lot to grow. And then when you see the hard skill stuff already happening, just imagine him with more weight, more strength. It's probably going to be a strength of his in the pro game if he can put on that weight. So that's kind of where I'm at with him.
It's going to be very hard to figure out as a group. I think we should go with how the votes are shaping up and also what our current preferences are, because we've seen those prospects a lot more now. And we're starting some are starting to emerge that we prefer. So preference and votes, and I think Kindel is the right guy to go at 23. There's a lot of support for Bill Zonnon. I think we all really love him, and I think it's fine to put him ahead of Vansaghi. The only thing with Vansaghi is that I think that the violence in the physical involvement is so great that I think it's a really special element. That's something that you won't find in most players, even if he's physically developed, even if his skating is a bit of a problem. Just like Zonnon, when he gets going, it's fine. And for every player, when they get going, usually it's kind of fine. Their speed is not the problem. It's change of direction, all this, but he has more than enough playmaking, more than enough stick handling skills. He can score from distance too. So he has enough special elements with that kind of unreal physicality. He's a bit of a kind of a Cole Baudouin profile from last year that we really like too. They're very similar, I think, in terms of how they operate. So I think he should be next, honestly.
Yeah, I think the difference between the two for me is the slight bit of more upside in Zonnon. Like I see a world where Zonnon's a supporting player on the second line, whereas I don't really see that for Vansaghi.
He has more room to grow too. Zonnon is light compared to Vansaghi, I think. Yeah. So more room to grow actually too. Don't forget about Hensler, please. The tools are amazing. He's 6'2". He has the mobility. He's very prone to mistakes and inconsistent. But we've seen on the World Juniors that he can play a relatively sound defensive game and can make some plays occasionally. I think he's a player who hasn't really figured out what he is and how to best use his tools in the game right now. But in terms of upside and certainty of making the NHL, I think he's going to get a lot of chances. And over the long run, maybe years down the line, he's going to build enough of a solid game to be a number 4, a number 5, someone who the game is always going to like him more because of the tools. And he's not that far from the Blake Fiddler, from the Aitcheson, from the Mrtka, I think. He's just in a difficult program right now in NCAA and not in a position to shine, but there's upside there. And we saw it last year too when he played with the US program and the year before. And he has a history of being better offensively too.
Well, you know what, David? He is being asked to play different roles on all these different teams you just talked about. And so, I was more impressed with what you said about the World Juniors, that he could be a plug-and-play guy. I don't think we're going to see any offense out of him this year. I just don't. But I do think it's there. I just don't think it's great.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, he's pretty vanilla, but he can skate and he has size. He's going to be an NHLer. It's just whether he's going to be a 6'7" or he's going to be a 4'5". But yeah, he's going to be a player and he'll get chances and he's fine. He's fine. We had higher hopes. If this was just a player that, if like, I think that kind of creeps in a little bit too, right? Because of how good he looked a year ago or 14 months ago or whatever.
Yeah.
That bleeds in. Yeah.
Now
I think there was push for Sebastian to put more in this range, right?
Yeah, I think like Will Moore, now that Hensler's off the board, like I like the idea of having Hensler over him. I think with Vansaghi, I might lean more just because of the upside, but clearly there's a lot of support for him in the room. So I think 27's a perfectly good spot for Will Moore at this stage. He's been kind of around that range for a decent while for us now. But I think that he's rebounded enough to be inside that top 30 quite clearly at this point. But beyond that, there's about 5 USHL names that can go in just about any order. So I'm not going to bang the table for any individual one, but a lot of different players that have a shot in this latter half of the first round when we're in the B range for the prospects.
It's funny because he came down on Jack Murtagh. Murtagh?
Yeah.
G in there.
Murtagh.
And I like him a bit more now. I like him more than Kevan. Not to the point where I think he has to be higher than this, but I see more playmaking out of him now in the recent games I watched. So I think it's his range too. Like he's you know what he's going to be like. He's going to be a two-way north-south guy mostly. We can shoot, a complementary scorer maybe, but there's enough flashes of hockey sense that maybe he could improve and become more than this average thinker of the game. So we'll see his development. I think even there's more questions now. Is he just a junior scorer in the USHL, or someone's going to make the NHL and really contribute in a top 9 role?
His pace is something that I think quells some of my doubts with Kevan. He's just so intense on both sides of the puck, and especially my most recent viewings, he was like the most dogged forechecker on Des Moines while leading the charge offensively, getting back defensively, dropping way lower to support his defensemen as well than I'd seen previously this season. I think that he's really gaining a bit more steam now that he's just been consistently playing in Des Moines rather than just ping-ponging back to the NTDP, and we've seen a similar thing with Mason Moe as well in terms of struggling to get going this season because of just that constantly changing environment. But I think Murtagh in the first round is perfectly fair. I think my range for him was like 30 to 35. So very much in here. And with Kevan as well, could be early second or late first. I don't mind too much.
Is Lauren going to pump up Epperson too? You going to get him in this range?
I love this kid. He's awesome.
Yeah, I mean, I can. Full disclosure, I didn't see him last season, so I don't know what kind of player he was before he entered the OHL, but he has just been dynamite this season. And yes, like we know he's playing with Michael Misa. I would argue that he really helped Misa's game unlock a new dynamic level. He's just a tank on the ice. He's the most physical player. He gets in on the forecheck, he'll lay open ice hits, but then there's also the skill level. He works give and goes, and he sees higher end plays, and then he hunts pockets of space. He's just a very, very well-rounded, like all around player who just makes an impact no matter where he is on the ice, no matter what role he's asked to play. He's a nuisance on the power play in the net front. He and Misa have great chemistry this season. And then you saw it in a few of the games where Epperson was not in the lineup. He's missed a few games with injury this month, where you kind of saw a little bit of Misa's shift-to-shift impact fade a little bit. And that's not necessarily a knock on him. It's just, passes weren't connecting with his new line mates, and the two of them just complement each other so well, and I think that's really done wonders for both of their draft stocks. And it's a credit to Epperson for finding himself in a new league this season after a little bit of adversity in his draft year, and he's just taken this top 6 role in Saginaw, a top line role, and he's run with it, and he's taken every opportunity that's been handed to him, and he's just looked like a first round pick at this point. And it is a shame that we didn't get to see him at the top prospects game because he's still recovering from that knee injury, but he was back in the lineup last night and he looked awesome. So I don't expect that to be holding him back in the second half.
I said this on Slack, but he's like, the way he changes the angle of attack and blends skill and the chemistry with Misa, it's insane. He drives just as much play as Misa does. I'm really, really high on Epperson.
Yeah, I also think he's a first rounder. I think the main thing that stood out when I was making that Michael Misa video was how effective Epperson is at just like they borrow each other's hockey sense like frequently. They'll cue each other on where to go. Those give and goes are so not just crisp but very effective in terms of where they do it, how they find space. But I think that Epperson is a great player outside of what Michael Misa brings to the game. Like even in isolated viewings, even in situations where they're not playing together, like Epperson stands out massively. Like I think he's a first rounder. I don't know if I prefer him or more. I'll leave that to someone who's watched both a bit more than me, but I really like Epperson. I know for a fact I have him in my first round.
There's value to having hard skill and playing with high end players as well, too, right? For the translatability to move up and down a lineup in the NHL level. Like he doesn't project to be a first liner, I wouldn't say, but if he can play with first line talent and bring that hard skill element to it, then you know, being a complementary third wheel on a line like that is it's not out of the question too. Big transition from last year, right? He's taken huge steps, I would say. Huge steps. We like that. We like a development path going up.
Yeah, it's very hard to rank him and more because they're very different points in their development. One is very light, and we want to see how he looks with more strength and in a better environment. And Epperson is getting the best environment with Misa, and he's older and more mature in his style of game. Like he's figuring out what he's good at now. So I think more there's so much uncertainty and so many different placement on our boards yet. I think he could be a bit lower, and we could have Epperson a bit higher for this board. And we're just going to see his progression in the second half because it's pretty typical for a player who still has more development runway to be better in the second half and improve on our board. Like we can take a wait and see approach with him and slide him just a bit lower. I think there's a lot of support for Epperson, and it should be at 27. We can slide more right after, and then Murtagh, Kevan, maybe in that order. It would be my order. I think I like Murtagh's more straightforward game. He's easier to project than Kevan, who relies on his speed, who's a playmaker, but a bit more inconsistent in the way he plays. And Murtagh is in a difficult environment right now, but I think he would shine even more, like a bit like Epperson with his hard skills next to line mates that are more playmakers. We can find him in space, so we have to account for that too.
So Epperson, Murtagh, Kevan, Moore, and then we're probably going to get Nathan Behm down. And then the last spot in the first round can be back up for debate, probably.
Dan, what do you think of Nathan?
I haven't had great viewings of him recently, but you know, the shot is legit, the playmaking is legit. He just probably needs to work a bit harder on the ice. Something that was like he's just like he's really good at everything. He just the team environment isn't super great. He doesn't have a ton of support. You know, I don't really know where I'm at with him right now, honestly. But he definitely deserves to be in the first round. There's no doubt about that. The tools are first round caliber, right hand shot.
High skill player, very aggressive in how he plays with his skill. He is not shy to try to go 1 versus 5. He has some hard skill elements to his game too, but as Daniel alluded to, it's really just the consistency of that impact, right? It's being more consistently physical, being the guy who can proactively engage opponents, then cut back and get to the middle more often. In terms of puck skills, he's a top 6 caliber player, but it's finding more ways to impact the game, finding more opportunities to get the puck off the wall that'll take his game to the next level. Again, in terms of pure upside, he could be at 20.
And we like upside, so he could close, or not close, but be at 31 on our board. And then I think we have to talk about Ivan Ryabkin. We had him at 32 last time. He moved over to the USHL and then started scoring. Is that
12 for a game?
for a couple of games.
Yeah. So I watched his first 2 games. I think it was game 1 and 2, and I mean, to me, it's this pretty much the same player. Obviously, he's still getting used to the new league. He scored 3 goals right away, and they're all pretty junior goals, not exactly a highlight reel, which has been the case for all of his points this year. My concerns with him remain the same. He's a low motor player. He's not creating anything this year. I don't see that same passing skill that he showed in the past, even going back into last year with his big production. He was still a very inconsistent player, and we're still seeing that this year. He throws a lot of hits, arguably a lot of late hits. He gets to plays kind of late and just chucks himself as hard as he can and hopes for the best. He's not a very smart mover when he's carrying the puck. He likes to go right into guys and dangle through their stick because he pulled off one play really well last year and he's tried to recreate that all year long and he hasn't been able to do it. He's not like you can pressure him towards the top of the point and he doesn't have any of that problem solving skills to get out of positions like that. He's constantly turning the puck over in the corners. It's it's a tough sell for him in the first round because you're really, really banking on those flashes to become so much more. And I just don't think that he has the rest of the abilities to translate to like a top six NHL career. And then what? It's you're looking at kind of a low projection, lower upside, and there's also the questions of uncertainty.
I also saw that he wasn't creating much. The low pace, lots of not a lot of projectable skill that he was able to show, but maybe he can turn things around in the USHL, but I haven't seen those games, so I can't really comment on them. But if we are talking about purely how he's looked this season in Russia, then he's definitely not a first round caliber player. So
he looked very similar in the USHL in the viewings I logged as well. Like I watched as well the game he played on Friday against Lincoln, and very disengaged defensively. Always the first player to exit the D zone and the last one to re-enter. Had a third period with a lot more energy once they're already down 5-1. Really upped the ante. I mean, he was more energetic than I'd seen him all season long, but it still wasn't amazing. So yeah, still a lot of question marks there, but very much the same kind of player on North American ice so far as on the European side.
As someone who had not seen Ryabkin prior to the USHL, I was actually pleasantly surprised watching him because I've heard, of course, a lot of the takedowns and read all the reports about his struggles throughout this season. But for me, especially in that January 3rd game, I thought he was pretty effective. 2 goals overall. It was a pretty solid game. He had some nice playmaking flashes like the saucer for the breakaway, some good off-puck movement. The shot is clearly an NHL caliber one. Dylan did allude to like he is physical, but it's often behind the play. But there were also some moments where he was able to force turnovers with his physicality, and there were also some moments defensively where he was back in the play before, even being the second last guy back, helping to guide a rush. Um, the pace and the skating though could be significant issues for me. Like that was the first thing that stood out to me. Um, really wants to slow the game down. The USHL is a very direct, very, very fast-paced moving league, and he was getting picked off by back pressure. He was getting angled by back pressure. You saw some poor shooting decisions that were a consequence of his inability to read back pressure and to separate. But, he is someone who I'm not sure about, how the sense and everything like that grades out, but in terms of tools, in terms of ability, as I mentioned with Nathan Behm, there's top six elements to his game. With Ryabkin, there are top six elements as well. So I'm going to be very curious to see how he does down the stretch here.
Yeah, I still think we should be careful not dropping him too much because I saw the same things as you. Like I don't think he's a top prospect in this draft at all, and I agree with pretty much everything Dylan said because I see all of this too. But I see the connective ability, like the ability to support teammates and be in the right spot, and like he doesn't move that much, but he plays a game that he plays in the game in a way that he doesn't have to move that much because he anticipates well. I see the flashes of hockey sense still in the USHL. I didn't see all of his performances. More going to have to watch him over the second half to see if he improves or he stay the same player. There's a lot of uncertainty with him, but again, we don't doesn't have to be in our first round. But I don't think we should drop him massively either because I see flashes of a player he was and could be to an extent.
I guess one question that we do have to ask about him is like how, like generally speaking, fallers in a draft are an easy, they're not going to make it bet. That's usually a bad sign if you're falling throughout the draft class. Obviously, there are exceptions, like Ryan O'Reilly, for example, was a guy who was a faller significantly and then made the NHL the next season. Not that Ryabkin is going to follow that pathway, but as like just kind of a broad discussion, like how comfortable are we ranking a faller, quote unquote, in the first round? What do we need to see to make him not a faller?
Yeah, I agree with that tendency in general. I think there are exceptions, but we've seen in past drafts that if you fall, usually you continue to fall. And the issue is that with this draft, there's not a lot of depth in terms of top six talent, and not that Ryabkin projects to a top six anymore, but that kind of level of ability with the puck and feel for the game. So I think we should be careful not dropping him after players who project to a fourth line or bottom six. Like I'd rather have the chance of Ryabkin, especially with everything that's going on around him. Like it's a negative that he has had trouble with his coaches, with keeping his spot in the lineup. But at some point, if he does figure it out and feels better about his game, like what does he look like now? So it's kind of a positive in the other way. So should be careful again. The next talking point, I think, is do we want to rank Nestrašil ahead of Ryabkin? They played together in a bunch of games. We really like Nestrašil, how he's been progressing because in general, it's been one of the best players in the USHL, I think. So we should talk about him.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, he's a powerful winger with a lot of runway. But he's definitely played better than Ryabkin in the games that I've caught with Muskegon. But of course, the situation's very different there as well. He's played there all season long. Ryabkin's just arriving now. But I'd be very curious to hear Daniel talk about how his viewings of Ryabkin and Nestrašil have kind of differed because I see them very tightly here in terms of the ranking spots and probably would favor Nestrašil, but they're basically back to back for me.
You know, Nestrašil, like you're talking about a 6'5" like right shot winger who is pulling off like higher end playmaking. He's violent. He wants blood on every shift. He absorbs contact. Um, I think he's just like scratching the surface right now. The Ryabkin thing is like he's obviously not in a great place in terms of how he's like his physical game's like not in a great place. Like the pace is really really brutal. But like I agree with a lot what Mitch said in terms of um, I saw a lot of creation, and I think I have Nestrašil ahead of him for sure. I think there's a higher certainty. I think the upside is probably higher. Um, and again, like other players, his trajectory is just going up. Like we have to respect that in a sense. Like so that's kind of where I'm at with them. I also think this is Simon Wang territory too. I think he's like I couldn't believe how well he was moving in the couple OHL games I watched. Like you're talking about like a 6'6" defender. He's raw. He misses reads and his peripherals and stuff, but like, oh my God, like this guy's like his edges are so good. He stays in front of attackers. He's disruptive. He's physical. Like it's like I've watched a lot of like junior A and high school kids and he's ahead of those guys for sure, like in comparison. So
Yeah, his skating size combo gives me Salayev vibes at times. Like the way he moves, is very very impressive. I've loved what I've seen from Hong in limited viewings. But yeah, I do have concerns about the skill level, but like the size and skating is going to draw so many NHL eyes. Like just already the fact that he's playing OJHL and just like hordes of scouts were just like flooding to go and see him. I think gives us a good basis for where he might go in the draft, especially if his season continues to progress the way it has so far.
he's activating and getting involved in the rush too. Like I was really shocked by it because I came in with like always probably like I came with a lot of assumptions on what I shouldn't have, but like I was just really really shocked by how well he moved, how involved he was in every play, how physical he was. Just like it's like pretty much everything you want out of a defender. And I think there's a lot of runway to improve. Like you're talking about a guy that was in the OJHL, right? Like, um, so yeah. But I think I'd have Nestrašil right here, and then
You can get if you can get Nestrašil a skating coach. right? Like they extend that stride out and get some more depth in it. Like he could be scary if he keeps going at this rate too, which is interesting. But I mean, you could say the same thing for Wang, not the skating coach, but if he keeps progressing like super, super quickly, I do also question like the skill level of what he's going to end up being. But that size and that skating will mean he's going to be an NHL player and will impact the game. It's just we'll see on what side of the ice he impacts it the most, which is probably defensively and more like most likelihood.
I could add two things about Nestrašil. While I was waiting for interviews and I was watching their testing, he actually showed some really good agility on like the weave poles for a guy his size. I was actually impressed with that. In the game, he was hard to knock off the puck. Like you couldn't knock him off the puck. At least nobody in that level could.
He's like we have him at 187 too. So there's a lot of room to grow.
Yeah.
And get stronger there.
He's a pretty inconsistent skater. Like you do see moments of the depth and the extension. It's just very infrequent. And so like I think a lot of it will be, as Daniel's talking about, like physical maturity and coaching and getting stronger in weight room time. So he's a project, but the upside is crazy. I mean, this is a fun stretch of this draft, right? It's just all projects who you can see the immense potential in.
Yeah, his playmaking is great, like pulling the puck between his skates, spotting teammates inside difficult moves. Like playmaking, he has flashes of high end, and he's very physical. He's violent. Like I really like him, and I think he's going to keep growing. He's a player on an upward trajectory, and we should aim for those players around that range too. And with Wang, he reminds me a bit of Sam Rinzel, but even bigger project, and it took like 2-3 years for Rinzel to really come into his own, and now he's finally figuring out in the NCAA. So he's an even bigger project than Rinzel, but a lot of upside too.
Ihs-Wozniak is still on the board.
Yeah, Jimmy, do you want to talk about him?
I think my view of him is like the same as last time we ranked him. So I think he has top 6 upside, but not very likely to reach it. A big risk with him. I think he's smart in the offensive zone. He has a good shot. He's a good playmaker. He finds open space. Just like Frondell, he doesn't really play from skating. His skating is probably, I don't know if he will even have an average grade on his skating. Kind of low paced in the thing he does, but he sees dice well. I think he has his defensive game has gotten much better during the season. I watched. I think he had a really good game. I think it was the final there versus USA in the World Junior A. He scored there on a great shot. Played a good game, but he also disappears in games, can go dark for long stretches of a game, and then you see him again. And I just saw today he scored 3 goals and an assist in a J20 game. So he's kind of that kind of player. So high upside, but with some risk. So I think he late first or early second, and that's in the range we're in. So I think he should be around here.
There's almost like nothing he can do at the J20 anymore. That it's just like whatever. It's like you've done that already. Now you need to prove it elsewhere.
I thought his activity rate was a bit better when I watched him recently compared to the past. Like he's upping his pace more frequently, I would say.
Yeah, and that's the Luleå's system is very high pressure forecheck. So if he's going to play with the SHL team, he has to upper his pace and more intensity. So I think that's why they have forced him to play the penalty kill, forced him in defensive situations, and so I think he's better. He's become better in those situations. But on the other hand, he when he's play like that, his offense sometimes disappears. So it's a bit So I don't know what it is, but he has upside. So I think he's an upside guy, and he will be a good player. I don't know if he can be a top 6 NHL player. That's a risk you take to make, but he has those kind of skills in his best showings.
Jacob Rombach would be one in this range. Doesn't have to be this pick exactly, but in the next like 7 or so picks, I think he's a really good fit. Rombach's just so solid defensively, makes solid reads, uses his physicality and above average mobility really effectively to angle play out towards the boards. Very effective at clearing the net front as well. Never afraid of getting gritty or kind of towing the line of legality to create small advantages in the defensive zone. And very meat and potatoes with the puck on his stick, but he's shown some pretty good games this season in terms of breakout ability. Not every single game's been a positive there, but most of them have been pretty decent. And often in the offensive zone, he circulates the puck a little bit from the blue line, but he can jump in and support the rush. But he's very conservative offensively. Won't be putting up many points in the NHL, but in terms of your number 4 defenseman, I think he's the best bet, at least in my neck of the woods at this stage.
Yeah,
I feel like we need to put like some numbers next to some players here, hey?
Yeah, I think it's a testament to this class that
I would
you know.
push very hard.